Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series about divorce from a divorce coach's perspective. I'm Vanessa White and I'm joined by the lovely Fotis.
Hello.
And we talked last week about loss and the loss cycle when you're going through separation and divorce. And this week we want to focus on children. So, looking at the communication we have with children when we're going through a separation and divorce. And it's about open communication, honesty, and helping them to feel safe and supported through that change. And Fotis and I both have children, and we've both been through a divorce. So, as well as our professional expertise, we also bring some lived experience to the discussion as well. So, Fotis, what are your thoughts about communicating to children during separation and divorce?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's at the forefront of all parents' minds, isn't it, when they're coming through divorce and separation? And it's probably the first question that we get asked, really, is like, how are we going to tell the kids? How do we handle that? So I'd say the first thing to do is not panic. It's a conversation that, with some planning and forethought, and constructive forethought can go better than you fear. And that the fear of these conversations is often usually much worse. So the first thing I'd say is have the conversation not in the heat of conflict. Don't throw it out there, when emotions are high, and sometimes it's very tempting, but try and plan it between yourself and your partner. Try and keep it as clear as possible. Try to keep the conversation as simple as possible. And to that, it's very, very important that you keep it age appropriate.
I agree. I think that feeling of planning, if possible, is a really important one. And ideally, both doing it together. That is obviously not always appropriate or possible, but where it is, I would say it is better for both of you to sit down together with the children. And I think it's really important, people worry about telling their children, understandably so, but
Mm.
children pick up on what's going on in the home. They pick up on your emotions much more than I think we realize. Even if we think we're doing a great job of hiding things from our children, they do pick up on stuff. And
Yeah.
if we don't communicate with them what's going on, they will be doing their own narrative in their head. So they will be thinking and picking up something isn't right with mummy and daddy, or something feels off, or, but they're not telling me what's going on. So they will kind of create their own narrative in their heads. And I think we're probably naive to think
Mm.
otherwise. And what we want, because often that narrative will be actually far worse than what is actually going on. And
Yeah.
so by being honest with them, like you said, age appropriate, I think it's really important because they need to trust you now more than ever if you're going to separate and divorce. And part of that trust is about being honest with them. If you don't know an answer to a question, say, I don't know. Don't sort of make up an answer because you think, oh, I've got to know everything.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, are we going to be able to stay in this house? Is often a question parents get asked. You may not know at the start,
Mm.
genuinely.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the timing, like when do you tell the children? And to your point, absolutely. I think the longer you leave it and you try and drag it out to sort of save their emotions, actually that just can fuel their anxiety, and they can come up with a narrative that's actually a lot worse than what is going on.
I
So
think so.
a few things to mention there, really. I totally agree. If you can do it together, if those circumstances, even if you're not amicable, if you can tell them together, and if you can use we statements rather than I or your father or your mother, etc., try and keep that narrative as a we, and try and give that consistency, because that can be very reassuring. And that's what the kids want, again, depending on their age, but they all want reassurance. They want to know that it's not their fault. So make sure it's clear that it's a grown-ups solution, it's a grown-ups decision, that they're not to blame. And at the forefront, of course, is just to let them know that your love for them hasn't changed and will always be constant. So yes, if you can deal with the practicals about where we're going to live, if you can deal with those at that time, make that clear and reassuring. Answer those questions of where we're going to live, how often we're going to see the other parent, if you can. And if you don't, to your point, say so. Say so. But keep it age appropriate. Don't go into the legalities and the financials. That's not what they want to hear, and that's not what's worrying them.
Yeah, and I think in those initial conversations, when you're telling your children, I mean, I remember I was so nervous and anxious
Mm,
about that conversation. I can kind of remember it now when I was talking to my children. And, it's really difficult, but I would say you don't need to make it too long.
no.
And
Mm,
obviously, again, depending on the age of the children, but even if they're older children, actually keep it quite short, quite factual, obviously compassionate and, loving in nature, but you don't need to go into loads and loads of detail. And you don't need to go into all the whys and wherefores of why you're separating. You want to avoid blame. I mean, you want to avoid blame all the way
absolutely.
through, even after you've
Yes.
initially told them, blaming the other parent, all of that stuff. But certainly initially, you want to kind of keep it quite short and sweet because
Mm,
obviously you will revisit it as you're going forward. I think there's a tendency we've got to tell them so much and all of it.
yeah.
And actually, it's a lot for them to take on board, even if they're older children, to hear their
Yeah.
parents are divorcing is a lot of information.
Yeah. And
Just,
that's a great point. It is so much. So I think you have to, as much as you can, keep it simple, keep it to the point, as you said, and also tell them at a time where you can be present afterwards. Now, whether that's literally physically being around, for when after you've told them, or just being available, because you're going to tell them this news. It's going to take them time to process it. They're going to have questions, and those questions are unlikely to be right then and then. They might have one or two, but their brains will be whirring. They'll be thinking about what you've just told them. And the questions might not come until later on that day or 2 days or whatever it might be. So my advice again would just make sure that you're available to answer those questions. It's not just about that one big conversation at that time, but it's also being there, being available and supportive afterwards.
I think that's true. And I think divorce, we know as adults, divorce shakes your sense of security. It's a very insecure process to go through, whatever
Mm,
age you are. And so trust is a real anchor through that. And I think for children, keeping their routines as consistent as
yeah,
possible, following through on promises, following through on what you say to them, because that gives them stability, which makes them feel safer. Um, Letting them express their feelings without any judgment, um, giving them the space to talk to you. Those are really, really important.
yeah, absolutely agreed. And what do you think in terms of we spoke about a support team or support group? I think it was our first, possibly our first or second
Yeah.
conversation. In terms of like a safety circle, support circle for kids, in terms of who else should you tell
I think
to make them aware?
that's a really great question. And I would say if they're school age, whatever age they're at a nursery or a school,
Mm,
then I would tell the school or nursery or whatever educational establishment they're at, um, pretty much when you've told the children, because they might go in the next day and be very off, behave in a different way, or might be
mm,
upset, or might be angry, showing different behaviors that maybe are out of kilter. And you want the school to be aware of what's going
yeah.
on. So I would say, and I think I did do this, I wrote, again, you can be brief, but
Mm,
just to say, this is just to let you know we are separating. It is, we're both involved in the children's lives. We wanted you to know. Please let us know if we've told them. Please let us know if you notice anything,
yeah.
whatever. And, just doesn't have to be anything deep, but just so they know, I think that is useful.
Yeah.
You know, um, Other kind of clubs or organizations, if they're part of, you know, consistently and as a family, you're big part of a cricket club or a social club or
Yes.
whatever,
Yeah.
it can be beneficial to tell who's appropriate there. I think telling, you know, if your children have got some key friends that they are very close to and they see a lot of,
Yeah.
I would say if they're younger children particularly, but even if they're older and you have a connection with the parents,
Mm,
send the parents a text if, you know, if they're not particularly your friends, but just to say this is going on, because again they can talk to their child and say this is going on in Jimmy's family, and
yeah.
you know his parents are changing, you know, are divorcing or whatever. It
Mm,
just helps give that child some people who they don't have to tell, because I think for children saying the words my parents are getting divorced or
mm,
my family's breaking up or whatever they use, I think actually saying it can be really difficult. And so
yeah. Yeah.
take away some of that from them, that they don't have to say the words
Yes.
to
Yeah.
people. Actually think that's really helpful.
Yeah. It takes that burden away from them, doesn't it? But also, I think if there's that consistent message from that support circle, safety circle, whatever you want to call it, if that group of people know and are aware, and also can give the same message back to that child about, you know, both parents love you, etc. You know, and keep that message consistent. I mean, I'd add to that as well, close family members.
Hmm.
And my message on that, and I know it can be tricky, is for families, whether the mum's side or dad's side, to keep the message consistent as well.
Mm.
You know, not to get into the blame game. Keep that, you know, keep the kids at forefront and priority. And whatever
Always.
you say behind closed doors about each other, whatever your opinion might be, just keep that message consistent.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's so important anyway, but I think that's so valid. And that message of consistency, it can be so hard to
Mhm.
not want to berate the other parent. And, you know,
Yeah,
depending on what's going on in the relationship or the reasons why the breakup has happened, it is hard not to blame, not to be angry, not to make derogatory comments. But really try and rein that in. It is so important. And actually, the outcome for children from a divorce and things, that makes such a difference if they have,
yeah.
you've kept that away from them.
Mm,
So
mm,
bite your tongue, grit your teeth, and just really try not to do that. We're
yeah,
all human and we all might
yeah.
do things and say things, but as much as possible, keep that away from them. Yeah, really, really important.
I think we could do a whole other conversation talk about how to do that particular
We could,
trying
because
to
it's
keep that
hard.
calm.
It's really hard.
It is really hard, but having that consistency is really
Yeah,
key, really
I
key. So
think,
keep it clear, keep it simple, keep it
yeah,
age appropriate, and keep your conflicts out of the conversations.
I think the other thing that kind of, I think another thing to talk about here, kind of the final thing, I guess, is about what we learn from these experiences. So, you know,
Absolutely.
obviously, divorce and separation is a massive change, and often we equate change with bad, but change doesn't have to equal bad. It's different, but it doesn't mean
Mm,
worse. It's new
yeah,
routines, new traditions. We can model resilience to our children. You know, that old adage, it's not what happens to us that makes us who we are. It's, you know, how we deal with it and what we
have to
do
deal with
with
it.
that. And I think that is so true. And I
Mm,
think for young people, particularly today, building that resilience is so important. So actually, you know, stuff happens in life that we
yeah.
don't want to happen, that can be massive,
Mm,
but we can get through it. And I think that message is actually really important for children to learn. We are modeling that all the time in how we deal with the divorce and
yeah.
separation. And, you know, it's important that they see that and learn that, yeah, it's not what we wanted,
Yeah.
it's not what we expected, but sometimes these things are out of our control, but we can move forward and heal from them and still have a good life.
Yeah, and that's absolutely spot on, isn't it? Because they're going to be looking at the parents. They're going to be taking the cue from our responses. How are mum and dad dealing with this situation? If we're over emotional in front of them, I know it's difficult, but if we can keep that in check and show them that, yeah, this has come up, it's not optimal, but we're dealing with it and we're moving forward. They're going to be looking at how you respond for their cues. So the calmer and more planned, clearer we can be, the better for them. I absolutely agree. Yes.
100%. Wow, we could talk about this for a long time because it is, and it's really important. And obviously, not everyone has children when they're divorcing or
Of
separating,
course.
but a lot of people do. And it is really important, what we communicate with them and how we deal with that. So I think it's a really interesting subject. Thank you, Fotis. That's
Thank
really
you.
great. And I think it's really informative. So hopefully we've given you some tips on how to communicate and when and how to kind of message to your children about the context of the divorce and the separation, and that it doesn't have to mean that their life is over and they're never going to be happy again, because they will be, and you can show them that, and that's really important. So I hope you've got some stuff from it. Please DM us if you have any questions, if you have
Absolutely.
any comments, if you want to talk to us about anything. Obviously, you can book coaching with Fotis or I. You can follow us. Please follow us on Instagram, TikTok. My TikTok is Vanessa White Coach and Vanessa White Coaching on Instagram. Fotis, you are.
On TikTok, I'm Fotis the coach, and on Instagram, it's emotional_equity_.
Thank you. So, yeah, please, we want to hear from you. And next week, we will be back and we will be talking about the emotive subject of domestic abuse, which obviously goes on behind closed doors. It's an issue that many people face, but we want to talk about that in the context of when you're going through separation and divorce from an abusive ex-partner, which conjures up a lot of extra issues. So please join us next week. And it was lovely to see you. And thank you, Fotis.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you
All
all.
right.
Bye.
Bye.